At the beginning of the year, I sat down and came up with a list of guests that would be absolutely my dream to have on. I've had a couple on before. Source Shop was probably one of them. But this one is another. It is the founder of Goodrays, the CBD drinks brand, taking the UK by storm. It is Eoin Keenan. And I was just delighted when he replied to me. I think I maybe had to follow up a couple of times. I was just so chuffed. And I came across Goodrays, I think at Waitrose, walking past the drink in the aisle. Goodrays is a CBD brand, and CBD is the zeitgeist of today. It is not the active ingredient as I thought in marijuana, but is the calming, cooling ingredient that mellows you out. It is not psychedelic. It's been around for hundreds of years. It is not just going to stop today. It won't stop tomorrow. I think CBD is here for a long, long time. It is quite clear how Eoin actually started this business, and it is clear when you listen to his story in the episode how. Without further ado, are you sitting comfortably? If so, we shall begin. Let's get on with it.
The big opportunity is to tap into existing traditions and replace products within them. Yeah, there's no quick fix. It's a lot of hours, a lot of hard work repeatedly, but a lot of also smart, focused work. You need both, right? You can't just work hard and be running around in circles. You need to have a really clear North Star. I think a mistake I made early on is like,
Thanks so much for joining me. I'm not going to lie, and this isn't like for drama purposes. But at the beginning of the year, I had a list, I think, of like 15 guests that I wanted on the pod, and Goodrays was one of them. So yeah, I'm very, very pleased that we finally managed to connect. And yeah, you very kindly have given up some of your time this evening. So thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I'm very pleased that you said that. That's very nice.
I think we were discussing this earlier. The whole CBD category has definitely blown up over what I would say is the last 2-3 years. And I still think there's definitely room for people to understand it further. I think it's here to stay. I'm sure you agree, but yeah, I was just so keen, and like your branding is amazing. I used to walk past your products in Waitrose the whole time back home. And so yeah, it just stuck in my mind. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I think we were discussing this before, weren't we, about the key composites of the first 100 days. And I think, yeah, we've even chalked some off and added some on even before we hit record. So I'm quite excited to hit on at least a few of those. But I think always is quite useful just to get a bit of context for our audience as to like your background, your upbringing, and really the components in that period that maybe explain why you started Goodrays. So if you wouldn't mind, yeah, just going through that a bit, it'd be super helpful.
Yeah, it's a good question. Upbringing was good. I mean, I grew up in Dublin, pretty much in the city, so just on the south side of the river there. So it's definitely part of my identity. I think when you're when someone lives abroad, particularly if you're Irish, I think it's got like quite a strong national identity. You become more attached to it, I think, sometimes even when you live abroad as a migrant. But yeah, I grew up in Dublin city, didn't really leave there for quite a while. So I went to school, went to university there. Pretty normal upbringing, I think, but kind of city upbringing. So was exposed to a lot in the city. Was very lucky to have big family, as most Irish people do. I think my parents were like massively supportive for anything I wanted to do. I probably also had like a little bit of an entrepreneurial streak in a way, in their own regards. And actually my mum has branched out, she won't like me saying her age, but she's, mid-60s and has just started her kind of first business, which is amazing. She's a speech and language therapist. And she set up this kind of app for teaching parents how to teach their kids about speech and language. And my dad had his own small business as well. So I kind of looked at that and liked it. And I think I also, growing up, probably had a little bit of an authority problem as well. So I was always kind of seeking for something that gave me independence and freedom in a way, and was kind of working out what that would be. And I had a few gigs and jobs in Dublin, working odd jobs outside of university and school. And I think the one that's probably the most entrepreneurial, which I don't really talk about that much, but I worked for the local milkman, which is a pretty good job. And I used to go door to door, like knocking on doors, selling milk subscriptions to people, usually during dinner time. But it was kind of like a freelance gig for myself. So I had a full time job when I was 18 at university. I'd finish university at 3, and then I'd go out to every part of Dublin. I walked across every part of Dublin, basically knocking on door to door. So I met every community, and was selling milk subscriptions, and that was awesome. Like it was obviously really tough. You know, you get a lot of doors slammed in your face, but I think when you work for the local milkman as opposed to like, you know, Sky TV subscriptions, people are a little bit more friendly and gregarious. So I really enjoyed that, and I think that's maybe where the kind of sales element started. Although my parents and friends might say I was always kind of a salesperson. I think you have to be if you're like a founder and CEO, whether you're selling to customers. Like your job is partly being a chief revenue officer as well, but you're also selling to candidates and to suppliers and to investors to make lots of people take a punt on you. And I think that was something I really noticed, you know, probably in this first 100 days is I was trying to buy stuff. I was trying to buy ingredients. I was trying to pay people. I was trying to hire people. And you have to convince them that you're someone worth working with. And that wasn't something I was necessarily used to. It's like you're just constantly in sales mode. So I think I learned that a little bit in my upbringing. But I think like the CBD journey itself started at university. So I went to university in Dublin. And I think when I was about 22, so I was like third, fourth year of university, I started really struggling with like anxiety and with sleep. And I started to become a little bit insomniac. So I was working these really weird days, kind of going home after the library at like midnight, 1 a.m. stuff. I just couldn't really sleep. And I went to someone, they said, look, you've got some anxiety issues keeping you up at night. I was kind of always like, that's not really me. That doesn't really feel quite right. And then maybe slight denial. And I think back then there was more of a stigma around things like anxiety. And I started to speak to people about, okay, what can I do about this? And predominantly looking at like what kind of natural or more lifestyle changes can I make? And someone recommended to me to try CBD. Now this is like 2014. So I knew about THC. Didn't know anything about CBD, but it's non-psychoactive, it's non-intoxicating. You know, it was used for millennia. It's used in food. Hemp is used in clothing and building materials. I was like, what's the risk really of trying this? There's pretty grey market at the time, so I started using that, like literally like kind of pestle and mortar, ground up hemp leaves, with oil infused leftover time. Like it was super DIY and super small scale, and like really coming from like an apothecary standpoint. So I started using that, and then after about 30 days, I was like, wow, I'm really starting to feel different. So I was feeling less anxious. I was less stressed about things around me, right? Probably became a bit more stoic. I was sleeping a lot better as well. Like for the first time, I was getting that kind of 7, 8 hours of sleep a night and going to sleep at normal times. And that was amazing. And I started to become a little bit obsessed about, well, what is this, right? How does this work? Why isn't this legal? Why isn't it available? And I actually asked my lecturer at university, can I write a thesis on this? Can this be something we discuss? Because I kind of worked in sociology and social policy. They said, yeah, give it a go. And I wrote a dissertation on it and became obsessed. And I basically, when I handed that in, I went straight to North America and really kind of to research things. But I ended up staying for nearly 2 years in the end. So worked on a hemp farm for 9 months, like growing hemp with a local family in Northern California, literally from kind of seed to the cultivation process to the manufacturing process, all the way to the customer. I remember leaving that farm in particular and saying, okay, this genuinely helps people, it helps me. It's also moving from this illegal space into this legal space. I think it genuinely has societal health benefits as well. So both, right, at a personal level, but also at a macro level. The change in the future is like consumers need this. And I remember saying to my now wife, who's there with me, that this is all I want to do. This is all I want to work in. So I think that was the kind of formation process, or the kind of thinking process and the development that got me into it in the first place.
You have an emotional attachment to CBD in some ways, just given the amount of help it's given you, especially during that difficult period that you just described. It's not underrated, but being able to sleep again properly, yeah, is amazing. Like, it just gives you a whole new lease of life, and then it's almost a circular pattern, isn't it? Because then you have more energy, you feel more upbeat, and you sleep better because of it, and it's this, this snowball, this positive snowball. So clearly, it seems like there's an emotional attachment to CBD. Was there a single point, or when did it dawn on you that this was something that you wanted to explore for a long time in your life, and this was your main passion, that you wanted to understand more about how it works and how the industry works?
Yeah, it was literally that point, that day leaving the farm. I had to go home obviously for visa reasons, and I remember driving out and going to San Francisco to fly home. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I've been growing, making my own CBD. I've been using it for 9 months. I've never felt in a better mental state. Now, there's obviously multiple aspects to that as well. But I was reflecting, I suppose, over how long I'd been using it, how much of an impact it had made, and just I also thought, this is genuine innovation, right? This is something that doesn't exist. CBD products, at least in the UK, and CBD drinks at the time didn't even exist. It was that point where I thought, okay, well, this is such an obvious thing that people want. And I think, for me, reducing my own alcohol intake helped a lot. And thinking about this in all the different formats it could take. And I remember being out there as well, where I was seeing all the big brewers, all the big tobacco companies buying up all the land. Like, they were there in 2014, 2015.
Mm.
They bought them decades before that. And so there was an obvious sign there that this is going to become a global consumer goods industry. And it was just a bit of a no-brainer. It was more like, the big challenge was, how do I get into this? How do I actually start a brand in this, right? Because coming back to the UK, it was totally illegal at the time. So I remember, like, the first time I went to meet people about the industry, and who was around the industry, and who was trying to push things forward so that we could create a genuine opportunity to create brands, to create consumer goods. And it was like 8 people in the basement of a pub in the middle of London. To compare that to where we're at now, I mean, I'm going to a conference tomorrow with 1,000 people from all over Europe in the Barbican, which is actually a conference that I ran for 3 years after that. So it's mad how far it's come. But back then it was such a small group, and it was policymakers, it was patient advocates, it was people who were on the legislative side. And so I met 2 other guys, and we helped start a regulatory agency, which have basically worked with government, but also with policymakers, patient groups, to help advance the regulation and the legislation of the industry. So in a way, we created our own opportunity. Not to say that we were the only ones it involved. It was very much a collective effort from different interested parties to get CBD and medical cannabis legalized in 2018. But that was definitely another watershed moment that said, okay, this is on, really.
Zooming into the first day after you decided to start Goodrays. I'm not sure if it was called Goodrays on day one or not, but on day one, if I'd been there with you in the room when you decided to start it, what would I have seen that day?
I think that process is quite manic, to be honest. Like, it's a lot of kind of whiteboard stuff and task lists. Like, a lot of it's like questions. What are the questions I need to answer to see if this is genuinely viable? Right? I've got an idea. I think it makes sense from my understanding right now. But then it's the questions, right? Like, okay, what else do I need to know? What do I need to see? Where do I need to go? Who do I need to speak to? How do I get into this industry? Because particularly for me, I was coming from that CBD and medical cannabis background, but I wasn't in food and drink. I wasn't a someone who's at Danone and Nestle who had an idea for a new type of chocolate bar or ice cream that could go and say, well, I know the supply chain, I know how this all works. I was literally starting from zero in that aspect, but I knew that I felt that I was more passionate about CBD than virtually anyone else, and I thought I had enough credibility to go and create really effective products in the market and use that. And for me, that's much more important, I think, than having a food and drink background. Is having the first and foremost like the passion for the product and for the community, and the rest I think you can work out on the fly. So that first day was really doing that, working out on the fly. Like I knew innately this is what I wanted to do and this was an opportunity. It was then working out, okay, well, exactly how, like, how do we make this happen?
One of the things you reference is speaking to as many people as possible about the idea, and then also at the same time research. So finding out what exists out there in the form of Goodrays. Did you so just touch on those 2 points, but also was the drink the obvious like point for you in terms of products, or was it more of the idea on day one and then the drink came, after a bit of time?
Yeah, I think the best business plans don't start behind a desk. You've got to get outside. You've got to see what's out there. You've got to see what exists, and that meant going into health and wellness shops, when you're going into Holland and Barrett, going into bars, going into restaurants, thinking about what I knew about CBD, and then thinking about, well, how can this actually impact consumers' lives? And I think one of the foundational beliefs which really guided Goodray was thinking about, okay, well, CBD was starting to emerge when I was still in the regulatory space as an oil predominantly. So you could see that in Holland and Barrett. But then thinking, okay, what's the core benefit we're getting from this? Is really that kind of calm, clarity, relaxation, anti-anxiety. And then thinking about, okay, well, you go into Holland and Barrett, you find caffeine pills, right? You find vitamins, you find all this stuff. But actually, the way that we consume the majority of functional ingredients is through a liquid, right? Because we need 12 liters of liquid a day. That's what they say now. We buy 4 to 5 drinks out of the home a day if we're in work and we're out and about. So it didn't necessarily make sense to me that we were trying to create a new way of consumption for a functional ingredient. Actually, what the big opportunity is to tap into existing traditions and replace products within them. So for us, the big opportunity is to take on, Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, go after those drinks. That's the big one, right? If we want to make this accessible for everyone, if we want to make this truly mainstream and make it a household brand, that's the big long-term opportunity. And you got to start small to do that. But I always knew that the format needed innovation, right? We needed to move beyond what we had CBD as at the time, and it needed to move into a space where it's great tasting, it's accessible, but also consumers are moving 1, 2, 3 degrees away from existing routines and consumption habits, and not rewriting the script for them.
So as a function of those conversations, so you say you spoke to restaurants, bars, cafes, did that then craft the products, or did you already have an idea about, maybe it needs to be a drink, let's just see if they think it's a good idea? I suppose, how important were those conversations in the context of what Goodrays is now?
Thinking about CBD formats and how best to deliver this in the long run, we looked at loads of different things, but what's the best impact we can have and deliver CBD so we can improve people's mental well-being, right? And that comes down to, well, how effective can we make products, and how mainstream can we make them, right? So they need to be both accessible and they need to be both effective for us to truly achieve our mission, right? If we think about that CBD mission. And I remember going into Tesco to buy a meal deal and going in front of the soft drink space. I was like, I don't want to drink any of this stuff. I'll drink the water, sparkling water, that's fine. But everything here isn't for me, right? There's nothing genuinely healthy for me. Even the diet drinks are, they claim to have no sugar, but what are they replaced with? What are they using as sweeteners? I remember thinking everything there is unhealthy and nothing here is delivering functionality. No, nothing is delivering health. And then walking around the rest of the supermarket, and I think you were seeing that like over the last maybe 30 years in particular, like we used to have a lot of fresh produce in supermarkets. It was predominantly fresh produce and it was more localized. But actually the supermarkets have kind of moved in one way, which is like, okay, ultra processed food, high sugars, cheaper, less regulated alcohol. So you're starting to get in a space where just everything is obviously it's built at a bigger scale, but it's not as good for you. So I think that was the bit where I was like, well, this format makes 100% sense. And then going out into bars and restaurants and saying, why did you have this in the menu? What do you do for people who are moderating drinking or want to relax? So I said, we don't have anything. We literally don't have anything. We have the same stuff you got in the supermarkets. And it just felt this is an omni-channel opportunity now to improve the way that we drink, to disrupt the soft drinks market, and also to add value to consumers who want to improve their mental well-being. So I think it's, like for most founders, it starts with you're solving your own problem. Like for me, I was using CBD, right? That was a solution in itself, but I was maybe falling out of routine with my CBD oils because again, it's not within a traditional routine. But if I had it in the fridge, I would drink it every single day. And then I think you start with that founding principle from your own problem, and then you go out and say, well, look, does anyone else have this problem? And that means going to bars, restaurants, supermarkets, but also means talking to your friends and family and reinforcing it. And I think that just gives you more confidence to really give it 100%.
So what comes next? So you have this idea, you've done a bit of research. It's quite clear that there isn't really much out there, especially in terms of functionality. As you just said, you paint that scenario of going for a meal deal, and the idea of a half a litre can of Red Bull doesn't pull you in, which is completely fair. So yeah, it's quite clear there's a space for this. But it's one thing, and like there's always that thing of like an idea is great, but it's nothing without execution. It's a big idea you have. It isn't just slightly improve on something that already exists in function. Like this is a new product, it's a new market. Obviously you have background in the industry and you've just explained that over a period of years beforehand. But then how do you actually take that idea and bring it to life in the context of those first 100 days? What comes next?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, execution is everything from that point. So I think the first things I did is, okay, let's map this out. This makes sense. This format makes sense. This product makes sense. I knew what the efficacy should be. I started to work out from bars, restaurants, like what the liquid should kind of be as well. Is like, well, what format should we have this in, right? If we're going to be, a best-selling, mainstream, accessible, adult relaxation drink, what should that taste like, right? So doing that thinking, tasting a lot of the stuff that was on the shelves that was kind of fulfilling that, but maybe without the function. So getting an idea of that, what's out there in the product space, right? Less so like what's happening out there in the world, but who is filling these different spaces? What's the, I suppose, competition, even though this is obviously innovation. And then working at that of like, okay, what do I really want to achieve? Zoning in on that solution and bringing it to life. And once you've got that, for me, it was about, well, how the hell do I even make that happen? So I went and found the best liquid developers I could possibly find. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment in itself, right? Because for the first time for me, I was meeting food and drink people as well. Like all they did was food and drink, right? They knew the industry back to front. And like I learned more about the industry in that first 2 hours than I'd ever had before reading Nielsen reports or market research reports. So going out and speaking to the experts was massively helpful. And then you always get put in touch with, oh, I've got a friend who does this, I've got a friend who does that. And then you can start to submerge yourself in the industry. And I think there's pros and cons from not coming from the industry. Like you have to do that learning very quickly, but you also come with a little bit of a, well, why do you do it that way? Or why don't we do it this way mentality, which can bring a little level of innovation in itself. And we've seen that come to life in other things that we've done where big brands start to copy the stuff that you do because you have that why not mentality. So I think there was that bit of like, let's get the liquid ready. Let's go into that process. And that's a long process, particularly when you're creating something like a CBD drink, which there were a few brands around at the time, but it wasn't like well-trodden paths. And there was also problems with formulation and problems with the ingredient, right? It's a relatively new ingredient as well in like the modern day and age, and a water-soluble ingredient. So going and speaking to liquid developers and creating that liquid was what, 12 month, at least 12-month journey. So it was long, and working out exactly what the stability should be like, what the liquid should taste like, where should it fit, what should it look like. That was all the kind of next stages. And once we defined that, like I knew what kind of brand I would like from a brand positioning point of view. I think most founders, like, they create the brand that they would like and that they didn't necessarily see that was out there. So for me, it, like, the brand needed to stand for that mental well-being and tell that journey. And there's a few things that we do as well, which is, we educate people and take them on the journey. We talk about the plant. We try and remove the stigma away from hemp, and we try and destigmatize mental well-being and mental health. So let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about these things. Let's be open about these things, because there's not a lot of brands that stand for either of those things. So it becomes a unique space within itself. So defining that brand positioning, then defining the product. And it's about how quickly you can get to market, how quickly you can launch, how well you can execute everything from that point.
Something struck me as you were just talking. So just going back a couple of minutes worth, you said you learned more in 2 hours speaking to individuals in the industry than you did from any report that you've read. I think for individuals listening to this that maybe want to start a drinks brand or a brand within the FMCG world, how do you even get meetings like that where you can get the advice?
I think most experts and most founders are really keen to share insight, really keen to, what's that phrase, teachers are leaders and leaders are teachers, right? So I think they love to say it. And I think people are really welcoming and opening. I've been really, like, impressed with particularly the drinks startup and challenger brands. It's like, that's such a collective, it's such a community, and people just want to tell you what they've learned, particularly people who've been on the journey for a while or gone through the other side of the journey. They've got all this knowledge, they've got all this insight, they want to help you. So I think you've got to reach out, and you've got to build that network. It's not always easy, but I think most people would be willing to feed back and to offer some advice. Maybe that's overly optimistic, and maybe I can't speak for everyone, but I think that's the approach, right? People are pretty generous with their time, with their knowledge, if they're not necessarily being sold to or wasted on time. Because I think, yeah, you never know these people who you can help and who you can work with as well. It's about building that network. And I think if you're bringing something really innovative to market as well, people are interested. They want to hear what's happening, right? Because you've probably got insight about where is that innovation coming from. So it wasn't the case that we were just building another adult soft drink and looking to speak to competitors. We were doing something really different, and I think people wanted to learn about that as much as share their own knowledge.
Yeah, and I especially think if individuals listening to this that want to reach out, you obviously have the classics, LinkedIn. You can even guess people's email addresses. I think that I did that with you, Eoin. But also, I think as well how you structure it and just being as specific as possible about why you would like this individual's time. I think the point you make around not being salesy or just being like personable, make it clear you've researched them, try and show that you spent a bit of time when reaching out. I think people are receptive to that. I certainly think you can. I actually know this is true in the startup world, especially that. It's surprising the amount of people that are willing to give up their time, and it actually isn't that even correlated to the size of the company. I mean, there's some people. I don't know your experience. There's some people that have like massive $100 million plus businesses that have responded very quickly, than others that have just started that haven't. So it's not even correlated in that way. But yeah, I think you just got to put the feelers out, and if you want it enough, you will get the responses.
Yeah, definitely, and I actually learned that relatively early on. Like, I when I was at university, I studied sociology, right? So I had heard that there's I suppose a political theorist, but he's also an activist and thinker called Noam Chomsky. I don't know if you know Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, I don't know where I've heard the name absolutely, but I'm just trying to picture where I've had it.
Yeah, and maybe I'm giving away my political affiliation, but he's incredibly knowledgeable And he,
Just
he was
Google it.
like, I was reading his books and stuff, but I'd heard that he responds to emails. So I reached out to him as a student. I mean, this guy must get thousands of emails a day, but he responded every single time. I'd ask him very specific questions about his theory or his writing and stuff that I was working on, and he would give me feedback all the time. And I was like, okay, this
Wow.
when you speak to experts, they want to share their opinion if they've got time. And I think also with specific questions as well. Like I think people say, "Oh, I want to pick your brain broadly." It's hard for people to understand. Well, are you actually picking my brain, or are you going to pitch to me something that you want to sell, right?
Mm.
And I think if you come in with, I've seen this specific thing, I want to ask you about that. That's when people can say, "Well, I know the exact answer to that. I can jump straight in and give it to you." I think it just removes barriers.
That's amazing. So what, you reached out to Noam, and I suppose that you'd researched him, you knew enough that it came across as like very researched, and you were like very clear about how you needed his guidance. But that's quite a cool story. The fact he kept on, I suppose, mentoring you in a way.
Yeah. He probably gave me better feedback than my lecturers and professors. I mean, he knows 10 times more about this stuff than many people do. So yeah, just I think building that, being specific, yeah, showing some level of credibility always helps.
People were interested, especially because it's a new category. Did it? Were you worried that because you had this big idea, and it was clear from your conversations with restaurants and bars that this wasn't really a product that existed in the real world and in the retail world yet? Were you worried that if you were going to speak to people that your idea could be pinched, or were you just so confident on the execution of the idea that you weren't worried that much? You knew you could do it better than most.
Yeah, ideas are dime a dozen, right? Like ideas
Mm.
don't make businesses, ideas don't make money. It all comes down to execution, and so I was relatively open about it. With the right people, I think people sometimes send you NDAs. Oh, you want to have a chat, but I haven't started my business. But do you mind sending an NDA? How many of those people have started that business? I think that's probably it's probably worth checking. I think it comes down to execution. Like businesses are all about how you go and what you do, right? And that's the value of founders is like what you actually go and do, what you go and deliver on, rather than what you talk about. So yeah, I was less worried about that because I knew. I also know, like you go and speak to people who have got their day to day life, and they're working on a different type of business. They're so focused on that, it's very rare they're going to be so convinced by your idea that they're going to go and steal it. And if the idea is really stealable, then it's probably not unique enough in itself, right? Because for instance, in my position, like I had enough credibility and knowledge about the idea that if I went and spoke to someone who was a food and drink manufacturer from Diageo, they wouldn't know where to start, right? They wouldn't know where to position this. They wouldn't know what the consumer was like. They wouldn't know what the regulations were like. I already had a few years on them, so I had enough confidence to go and speak openly about this stuff because I knew that I had the credibility and authenticity to start the brand and to execute really well. So if it's super easy to copy, then there's probably not a huge amount of IP in it.
Were you full time from the get go with the Goodrays? As in, you didn't have any other incoming finance, or did you had you saved up enough to be able to like bridge that gap? Because I think, again, I mentioned this in a lot of episodes, but slightly awkward conversation, I suppose. But I think a lot of things, well, a big factor holding people back is going from a job that pays you X that you can pay your bills with to then starting a company that maybe won't make money for a long time. So I'm always very intrigued as to how founders negotiate that. What was the situation with you? Feel free, obviously, not to go into as much detail as possible.
Of what the salary I gave up in specifics.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
look, I I worked up until the point where I knew that this had proper legs and I could manage the risk. And I was saving over that period to do this. Like all the money I was making on my salary, I was putting back into the business. I mean, I didn't have a huge amount of money, and yeah, transparently, it wasn't the best paid job in the world, but it was a job that paid, and I lived pretty frugally so that I could fund the beginning of the business. But yeah, I definitely worked in tandem with my job. Now, fortunately, my job was in the space, right? Like my job was in CBD and medical cannabis, so I could work on the side and maybe work a day a week. It gets really tough to manage, but you start to build that proof of concept, and then you start to find, okay, my time is being pulled over into this other opportunity because things are starting to develop. Whether the product itself is nearly ready, we're getting some scale, we're having some conversations, retail conversations, we're maybe ready to raise some capital. But yeah, I do think that is the big challenge, and why a lot of people don't do it, because I think like structurally there's never been a better time to start your own business in terms of like the technology and tools that you can go and access and how you can learn and educate yourself. I do think in a way it's become democratized and become more open to
Mm.
everyone from a technology point of view, right? But from a financial point of view, I think maybe the opposite, because you've got cost of living crisis, and there's a lot of stress on that. I mean, I was very lucky that I was what, it's hard to think back then, 26, 27 when I made the move. And I can really understand if you've got dependents why you wouldn't be keen to do that. But I think I was fortunate enough that I could gamble, and if it didn't work out within a year, I could go back. But I've always lived fairly frugally. Like I'm not a big spender, so I wasn't giving up a huge lifestyle. Um, yeah, a lot of my lifestyle is the work, so I wasn't sacrificing big trips abroad and that kind of stuff. And I suppose the job and and Goodrays itself gave me enough pleasure and fulfillment and contentment to you know to give up the stuff that other people like to spend their salary on.
Yeah, and did you like move back in with your parents, or did you live with a friend, like for a good amount of rent? Like again, sorry, I'm slightly prying here, but I'm always just fascinated with like the sacrifices that people have to make to make that jump. And I say I appreciate you say you were living frugally, but for individuals that you maybe even think
Yeah,
I do that anyway, but I like rent's grand a month or whatever. How do I even deal with that?
yeah, no, I saved up enough to cover rent. Now, I was living with three other people as well, so like two housemates and my partner, who's now my wife. So I knew it was de-risked to a certain degree on that side. And then I was saving up and yeah, not doing a huge amount. I mean, yeah, I did stay in the warehouse a few nights. So we got a little small room where we were basically doing the packing. So when we got our first shipment of cans, just packing box after box after box, dropping it to raw milk, going back and doing the same thing, trying to market the brand in D2C and that kind of stuff, and trying to sell to customers. But that was relatively cheap. Like I rented off a friend for next to nothing, to be honest. It was more of a favor, right? You call in a lot of favors in those early days to get started. So yeah, it was more of a time sacrifice, just like sacrificing every weekend, sacrificing holidays to focus on what needed to be done. But luckily for us, it took off relatively quickly. Like I've heard a lot of horror stories about people who are not working, not taking any salary for ages. I mean, I didn't take a salary for a year,
Mm.
which was tough but doable. But I know a lot of people have done longer, so you get a little bit of perspective early on when you go and speak to other people about what's needed, what's required, and also how bad it can get. But fortunately, like we had relatively quick proof of concept and traction, so we were able to move relatively quickly.
Yeah, that's because would you say that's quite unique in terms of the like how quickly it grew, especially coming from an individual. You're not like a celebrity that is launching a brand and then it just picks up. Like it's picking up in its own right. Clearly, you're at the
Mm,
forefront of a sector that's growing. Um, I think even just more fundamentally. Sorry, I was going to ask something else, but I've switched now. Like you're not it's quite rare that you have an idea that it is a new market. Like yes, okay, it's a drink, fine, but and there's drinks, but this is its own subsector. I think just for listeners, and we'll continue the story in the 100 days in a sec, but for listeners, how what are the components of finding yourself in a position where you can find that next unique idea? I appreciate you have spent time in the cannabis industry beforehand. and then it's obviously a timing thing because you knew this was clearly the right thing to do. But in the context of other ideas, how do you think you get to a space where you can find the next CBD, the next unique idea?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it took me what 5 years of working in the CBD industry, which is new, to really start Goodray. So maybe I'm not the best person to answer, but I think when you, I think as I was touching upon earlier, like when you've got a problem and you think there's a an easy solution that you have found in yourself and that is technically possible, there's almost 9 times out of 10 a lot of other people are going to be going through the same thing at the same time and maybe just not aware of it. So once you've discovered the problem and you think there is a potential solution, I think going and getting that problem out loud. It could be something small, like it can be a productivity problem, it could be a comfort problem, it could be anything. I think it all starts with the problem. Like if you're not solving a problem, you're not really selling anything. You know what I mean? So you need to go back and say, okay, this problem exists, and then find that unique point of difference as well. Because we talked about this off the call. There will be other people doing things around it, but how well are they executing? Is there a better way of doing it? Those are also innovations in their own right, and I think it starts with the problem. And if you've got a problem with an existing solution, then is there something totally new, or is there a better way of providing that solution?
Yeah, there's two categories there, isn't there? There's like the totally new, which you could argue CBD is, especially in the UK, and then also just can I do it better? But yeah, I like the fact of linking it back to a problem. I think it's also just being in a space where you have enough time to think about like what would you improve if you could? Because I think, as I say, for a lot of people, me included, if you're just so busy day to day and your mind is always on like nonsense things like admin or your job or just random shit, then you maybe don't have the space to think about it. I don't know, but it's finding out what's important to you maybe, and what
And I think
wishes
that's
around that.
it's like from what I've seen, like I'm sure someone's done actual studies on this, but 99% of the innovation comes from doing something better. Like
Yeah.
trying to find total newness is like trying to find a pot of gold. It's
Mm.
really really rare. And even when people tell you this is newness, this has never existed before, do your due diligence on that claim, because there is going to be stuff that exists of people trying to do something similar. So nowadays I think it's about and it's innovation in its own right. Like reinventing something that already exists, but in a different format or in a better way, can be just as valuable. And that could be the difference between something becoming mainstream and accessible, even though there was people looking at similar concepts at the same time. So yeah, I think I'm never concerned necessarily about like there's someone else doing this in the same world. There's got to be a point of difference on that if it's something we're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Usually I like have questions, I just come back with an answer. But I was thinking about that as you were saying it. I think that's such a fair point. Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I'm going to take that one away. But the continuing the story in the first 100 days. So you say I slept in a motel in the Midlands, visiting a production site until midnight for days, driving around to different warehouses and collecting the ingredients that we were missing.
Yeah, I mean, I said 100 days, didn't I? But like that was really the first year. Like small scale production of food and drink, particularly cans, like RTD cans, are really hard. And I spent so many, like most weeks, because we were producing so quickly because the demand was ramping up. They were producing almost every second week, and trying to find a canner with capacity and get all the materials and do all the logistics just by yourself was really difficult, particularly because like early COVID supply chains were disrupted at that time. So trying to get everything in time post Brexit was a nightmare. So I used to basically stay up at the manufacturing site in West Midlands. I was staying in a motel for days on end because we didn't have budget for Airbnbs or anything nice like that. So I was in the cheap travel lodge at the side of a motorway. and it was me, and this is the beginning of COVID, and you could only travel for work or for like extenuating circumstances. So I basically was there with a lot of middle-aged men who had spent a lot of time at home at the first lockdown, and basically their wives didn't want them around anymore, or vice versa. Like if you remember the beginning of COVID, like the divorce rate skyrocketed. So like travel lodges were for like people like me who were working, traveling through the country, and then people had basically been kicked out. So it was maybe
Nice.
it's not pretty glamorous, but it got the job done in the end. So yeah, you build. I think that that first year in particular, you build resilience. If you can get out of year one and year two, and you've grown and you've made progress, then you're flying.
As you were saying that, I was just trying to understand the dynamic of the hotel. I imagine most of them weren't too happy, were they? Or were they just absolutely buzzing because they're free of their wife? I'm not quite sure.
But there was no, it was miserable. It was
Right.
really
Okay.
miserable. It was really sad. It was really morbid, and there was no social space as well. So like it was just like everyone getting takeaway curries, uh, going back to their one bedroom travel lodge, and I remember just like walking through. This is gross now, but like walking through the corridors and just like curry plates outside every door because like no one could eat in the restaurant, no one could eat in the bar, so everyone was just eating these rooms. It was yeah, it wasn't the most glamorous.
I'm sure there's like a Vice documentary in there somewhere. We could probably come up with one. Um, but I suppose actually back to a serious point. I mean, look, I think from the outside, people could look at Goodrays and your story. Obviously, it's going great guns now. It clearly took off quickly, but behind closed doors, or certainly closed doors, literally there. It wasn't glamorous for a lot of the time, and it was really difficult, and you had to sacrifice a lot, and it was just really fucking hard. Is that fair to say?
Mm, yeah, absolutely. I think I like in my naivety of starting the business, I was thinking, okay, what's the you think, okay, I've got an innovative product. I can innovate everything the rest of business, right? I can do an innovative marketing campaign, or I can create a new supply chain, and like everything's going to be way more efficient. I'm going to innovate every single area. And what I realized, like, now is like, okay, I can innovate in the product space. Like that's where most founders are really good at. And then there is wisdom behind conventional wisdom in the other areas, right? So like you're not going to disrupt or it's very unlikely that you're going to overhaul the supply chain overnight and come up with an immediate solution. There's no silver bullet marketing campaigns that's going to create a viral brand overnight. Like building a business is lead bullet after lead bullet, like just continuously chipping away, turning up every day and trying to give like 110%. That's the thing that really builds businesses. Is it's just every hour, every day, just keep doing the stuff that works and working out what doesn't work. It's not, as you talked about earlier, like doing a big celebrity campaign. It's not taking a company public on London AIM. It's not rewriting the script of logistics and customer distribution. It's just about keep building, keep delivering on your promise, be mission led, hire great people and empower them to do their best work. There's no there's no quick fix. It's a lot of hours, a lot of hard work repeatedly, but a lot of also smart, focused work. You need both, right? You can't just work hard and be running around in circles. You need to have a really clear North Star and a really clear plan and focus to get there. And then it's hard work every day to get there. And you know, at some point, I think it gets easier. I think mentally rather than actually like physically. Physically, you're still exhausted, but mentally, I think you become every year you become more confident that this business is working and it becomes more sustainable, it becomes more profitable, and it keeps growing in the good times over the macro stage of the business. And I think you build more confidence, you build more resilience. That's the bit that gets easier, but every day is it's the hard work, right? The stuff you do does change over time, but the repetition, the processes you need to follow, and the hard work and getting stuck in doesn't really change. That's the stuff that stays still.
Yeah, some of my previous guests, especially in their first 100 days, a lot of them say, get a co-founder, get a co-founder. And I don't think you had a co-founder at all. I might be wrong on that. How long were you going it alone? I appreciate you were speaking to people and getting advice and feedback, and you knew people in the industry and you eventually hired people, but how long were you doing it on your own per se?
No, I was very lucky actually to meet like a few really influential people who became mentors to me in those first 100 days. Who founding members, I'd consider them co-founders, and they still advise me today, and people with bags of experience that can back you and support you as well, and they can be on the other end of the phone and they can get stuck in with you. I mean, I had that for the first few years, really working back and forth. So I didn't really feel alone at that stage, and I think I was very lucky to find those people, both like from the entrepreneurial journey, but also in the food and drink world, like finding those key people and taking them on the journey with you. You need that. You can't do it alone. Like you can't do it from alone in terms of advice and sharing the burden of the stress and the weight of the business. Like you need mentors and advisors to be around you to support that, and then you need the team below you to execute, and you need them to back you and to believe in you, and then you need to empower them as well. So I always think about it, as above in a way in that advisory roles, but also below. You need both of them so that your burden doesn't become too big to carry. And I think, I also think a lot of founders, MDs, CEOs, they try and hold a lot of the pressure because they don't want to unnerve staff about, here's some challenges coming down the line, or here's where our issues are. And I've actually found like that's been a massive turning point for me, is actually you hire these people because they're super smart. So like, why don't you have your smartest minds working on your biggest challenges? So one of our mantras is like, bad news should travel faster than good news. We should be aware of challenges. And I think a mistake I made early on is like, people bring you problems and fires all the time, and I think you get kind of like a bit overwhelmed because you're dealing with so many different fires, and you say, well, bring me the fire, but also come to me with a solution. I think that was actually a mistake, because then you incentivize people to keep fires burning and not tell you, right? Because they don't have a solution yet. So I think we try to change that of like, bring me the bad news and don't worry if you've got a solution. Let's work that out together, right? And if I can't maybe help you, there'll be someone else I can, right? Whether it's an advisor, whether it's someone else in the team. Let's get all our minds on it. Let's tackle it as a whole rather than as an individual. I think the other thing we did is like actually mapping out the P&L together, right? So we go in every day. I mean, we'll do it tomorrow. Is we'll get the P&L on the board, every cost, every channel, every revenue channel, all our profitability across everything on a month by month basis. So we know, okay, this is what number falls under everyone. We see how we all fall in line together. So if someone else's number is struggling, someone else's number is winning, how do we help that? How do we collectively move that forward rather than like an individualistic approach? And it just means everyone's got really clear view of how all the departments work together, how all the people work together, and also getting us all on the same page, getting us aligned on the North Star as well as the day to day.
It makes complete sense. If people, the more visibility employees have, the more they feel they're part. Well, they are part of the journey. They're integral to the company. It's not as though that there's a management and then you never really hear about the decisions that are being made. I don't think that's a particularly healthy structure, especially in the startup. So yeah, I like the fact that you're sharing that information. Everyone has a bit of buy-in. It feels like one unit rather than a segmented hierarchical structure, which I don't think is useful.
The absolute like the game changer for me on that, or when it came to life and it was like a praise be moment, is we do like an annual away day as a team. Well, we actually did an annual like 2 days away, and we try and get everyone on the same journey and align on that page. And one of our heads of department was recommending something that was a challenge for him. Right, it was going to be more work for him. He was going to need to work harder, but it was a benefit for someone else's team, right? So for, let's say, operations, I'm going to do something more difficult, but I'm going to recommend this for growth, right? I'm going to have to take on that burden. I'm already stretched as everyone is in a startup. And I think seeing that of like, oh shit, you're looking out for someone else. Like this doesn't fall into your numbers. This will fall into your numbers, and it might harm your numbers, but you actually get it because we're all looking at the same growth plan. We're all looking at the same P&L. You really actually understand each other, and then you're recommending for someone else how we grow the business. I think that was amazing to see because it just took everyone else out of their like individualistic roles, and then just things like when you speak to people, sometimes people actually do finish each other's sentences, even if they're talking about different departmental priorities, and seeing that kind of cross collaboration, that's the best thing, and it gives you real confidence in your team's ability to execute, and it again removes that burden.
Yeah, it must give you confidence, but that's the culture that you've instilled yourself, obviously with the help of others, but it absolutely needs to come from the top, and especially when new people
Well,
join that. When people join, them inherently might not 100% align with the ethos. I mean, they've come from another company or background. It's good for them to have new ideas, but I can't remember reading or hearing that a bad culture is where someone new can come in and completely change it or have a huge impact. And a great culture is where someone comes
mm,
in, yes, they have differences, but they're not able to damage the dynamic.
yeah, definitely, and I think for that to be successful as well is like culture shouldn't just be top down, and it shouldn't just be one way. It should just be me saying this is how we're going to
Yeah,
work. Is
yeah.
people should come in, work together as that early team, and then we should be talking about how do we define the culture? What do we want to be more like? So it becomes you again have it more inclusive, have it more grassroots. You get great ideas coming up, even just the language around culture or the principles or the behaviors or what we actually do to bring that to life. That comes from the grassroots up as well. So to define a culture in an early stage business, it can't just be me telling everyone this is the culture. It's got to be, you've got to have a feedback session. You've got to take people on that journey, because when you create a culture and when you create behaviors, you're also creating standards that people have to live up to. And a lot of the time, to like maintain those standards is a lot of hard work. So you're making commitments, you're making sacrifices to live up to a culture. So you need people bought in from the beginning and feeling like they've been a part of that defining period.
I think the story of the first 100 days has been pretty thorough. I do want to just briefly go back to the time before the 100 days even begins, and I have this a bit. But do you, when you had the idea to start Goodrays, was there anything you had in terms of preconceptions about what it would be like to start a business that ended up not being true? And then is there anything vice versa where you completely just didn't anticipate that it became pretty apparent that this is a major factor in building a business?
I definitely thought like you could build a viral brand pretty quickly. You could come up with some
Yeah.
creative marketing campaign that would take off. I thought, those first 100 days, PR is going to be really important. If we get in the Sunday Times, that's going to launch the business. It's like, we're in the Sunday Times like a few times a year. It's not a needle shifter. It's great. It's great to get eyeballs, but like building businesses is, as I talked about, like lead bullet after lead bullet, and a lot of the stuff that actually does change the needle like isn't in the initial business plan. It's not what existed or what you thought about before starting the business. I thought you could make it viral or things just take off. Like they don't just take off. You've got to work at it. You've got to push it like every single day. I think as well as in like being a founder, a CEO. So it's my first CEO role. I also probably thought you need to be a little bit more of a, what's a good way of saying this? Like kind of like a strong man, right? You've got to hold all the issues and challenges and not be vulnerable or transparent. When actually I think that's massively beneficial to be really open with people as well. I think you create a different dynamic and you create a more transparent and an honest culture. And you need to take feedback as a CEO just as much as anyone else, if not more so. And I didn't necessarily know about that too much. So I think those were big things. And then what I talked about as well is I thought maybe it'd be more glamorous. I don't know what I was expecting. But I think I thought it might be more constant creative brainstorming. But it's a lot of just getting shit done, to be honest. and that's fine. You adapt to it, and you learn to love it as well. And then you have those moments of creativity and inspiration, but it's not that all the time. A lot of it's just getting stuck in, and yeah, I think you learn to love that though. You learn to get just when you bought into the mission, when you align with the team, when you love the people you work with and the stuff you're doing, and you're enjoying the growth. None of that really matters, to be honest. Like, because all that stuff supersedes the glamour or the fancy bits.
Yeah, the mission is at the core of this, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned it at the beginning, but I think without, as you called it, the North Star, you don't have much else. I mean, that's the thing that drives you through, and you find solutions around that. I think it is. It's not lucky because you've worked in that industry for a long while, but I don't think that many people in life have that North Star, or like are aware of it. Let me rephrase, that they then drop what they're doing or evolve what they're doing and start a business. So I think it's quite special to be able to, yeah, believing something enough and then actually execute on your idea and bring it to life. Yeah, I just think it's super cool. And like, I don't think that is exclusive to you or the guests I've had on. I think probably everyone or most people could do that. I don't think some people are luckier than others in terms of their situation. But yeah, I just think it's
Mm.
wonderful to be able to just believe in something so much and then be able to actually craft something and work in that issue and then find that solution. I just think it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think the one good thing lots of good things I've read about, missions and defining a mission is like the mission should never be money driven. Like if you're just looking
Mm,
for a commercial opportunity, I don't know, drop ship on Amazon. But if you want to build a brand or a solution, um, then you've got to have a real mission behind it, because the first thing to, like, if you don't have the inbuilt passion for the product, for the solution, for the service that you're delivering, then when times get tough, like that's when you'll quit. You'll be the first one to go. It's the passion bit that stays the longest, and I think that's something I'm really keen when we're hiring as well. Is like, why do you really want this? Right? Are you really bought into it? Do you have a personal reason to be, or professional? But professional, personal. There's a blurring of the line sometimes there. If you've got the determination and motivation right, then that's half the work, I would say.
yeah. Uh, and then also, I was thinking about this. So I'll just be a bit selfish here. Me personally, I think I'd be terrible at, even if I had a passion about being at the helm of a business that is just a steady ship. So it might solve an issue that I care about, but if it was just like, business as usual, just normal growth, not really innovating or just at the helm, that for me would just be incredibly boring, even though it'd be in the right industry and solving the right issue. Is that important for you to be always innovative and creating new things and pushing new boundaries and growing and just pushing things each day? Is that quite a cool component in your mission, or could you just flatline and you just love the issue so much and the cause so much you could just do that forever?
No, it's a really good question, and I really have a lot of empathy for people who stay at the helm of brands that are stagnating or declining. We are so lucky that we haven't been in a position. We've been growing 100% year on year for 4 years. So the growth journey is so exciting in itself. Um, and I can't tell you what it would be like if it was declining or stagnating. So, but the people who are sticking it out, and businesses stagnate and can come around and turn it around again. Like the people who really stick that out and do it, I think are so impressive. Like, and that's got to come from some kind of passion for the project. I think it's really important, but it would, definitely gets tested when things start to plateau. Fortunately, it hasn't done that for us, but I like to think that because I come from that place of a passion, this really started as a passion project, that I would 100% stick by it and still be giving it 100% every day, even if we were stagnating. But I'm just very fortunate that it's not the case.
I couldn't think of a better place to end. So, Eoin, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Cool. That was fantastic. Thank you, man.
Yeah, no worries. I really like your interviewing style. It's great.
No, that's really kind. I at the beginning, actually, the first episode, I was speaking to Dan about this, actually. You can barely actually hear what the person's saying because you're just shitting yourself and waiting to get the next question out. But like these ones are great because like it's the way I treat them is like it's almost, I pretend I'm listening to a podcast that I just put on, but you can control what the questions are,
Oh, that's
and
good.
it's really fun because when you listen to stuff and you're like, why didn't they fucking ask that? Like they
Yeah,
should have
yeah,
asked that, or why didn't they try more? And so
yeah.
that for like I'm doing that, but also I can control it a bit. But no, I thought that was really, really insightful, and you told the story. You're a good storyteller. I think you told the story really well, all the way from early upbringing and then tackling those first 100 days. But the points were really clear, and yeah, it was just good storytelling around them. I'm sure our listeners, will be really delighted with that. It's fantastic.